corridor lights flickered again. A faint whine pulsed from the ceiling panels like a dying animal, whispering its complaints into the ductwork. Yelshera narrowed her glowing eyes and muttered something untranslatable in Viralan, though it roughly equated to, "May your processors melt into porridge." She was 3 decades into her service, had led planetary sieges and survived acidic rainstorms on Valgor Prime. But nothing prepared her for the bureaucratic maze that was Deck 7 of the Human Alliance vessel, Dralix 5. She paused at the junction, checking the room code again. C-27. She had memorized the layout 2 hours ago, but the humans had a habit of swapping numbers around without any logical pattern. Probably thought it was funny, or maybe it was part of their psychological warfare tactics. Confuse the enemy by making every hallway identical. Her boots made soft, magnetic contact with the flooring as she turned left, possibly the fourth left she had taken in the last 2 minutes. The walls here were different, less sterile, warmer light. She couldn't explain it, but something in the recycled air had changed. Less citrus, more dust and salt. Something primal. The door she stopped at hummed faintly. C-27. Finally, she touched the panel. It slid open with a polite mechanical chirp. The room was dim and occupied. A shape lay curled on the bunk, half covered by a thin thermal blanket. The faint sound of rhythmic breathing punctuated the quiet, slightly uneven, with a nasal whistle at the end of each exhale. Human male, approximately middle 20s, judging by the facial stubble and strategically placed snack wrappers. There was a boot resting on the console. There was a sock on the console. And was that a half-eaten protein bar on the ceiling? She didn't want to know, but there was also something else. Warmth. She hadn't felt it in her own quarters, sterilized and hyperventilated like the inside of a specimen tank. Here the light was low, the walls hummed softly, and the faint scent of, what was that? Burned carbohydrate? Hung in the air like incense from a primitive ritual. She stepped inside just past the threshold. The door closed behind her with a whoosh that sounded far too final. She froze. He shifted. Then, without opening his eyes, he mumbled, "If you're here to kill me, can you wait till morning?" "I already brushed my teeth." She blinked. He turned slightly. Still didn't open his eyes. "Also, just FYI, closets to the right, bathrooms somewhere. Depends how brave you are." Yelshera had faced plasma fire. She had stood knee-deep in the blood slush of Gorvak Outpost, but nothing had quite prepared her for the moment a human sergeant spoke to her in his sleep, like she was a roommate who'd lost her keys. She considered retreating. She really did. But instead, her body decided otherwise. She moved quietly, almost instinctively, and lowered herself onto the short bench under the viewport. The cushions were absurdly soft, almost offensive in their comfort. "You always just stare at people like that?" he asked, eyes still closed. "You are not what I expected," she said cautiously. "Good. Expectations are exhausting." He finally cracked an eye open. "Nice armor, by the way. Did you win it in a cereal box?" She tilted her head. "What is cereal box?" He sighed. "We've got work to do." There was a long silence. She stayed seated. He turned onto his side, facing away now, hand dangling off the side of the bed. "You're not going to kill me, are you?" "No." "Cool. In that case, welcome to the mess." She didn't respond, not with words, but when his soft breathing resumed a few moments later, she was still there, watching, listening. Outside, the hallway lights flickered again. The war was waiting, but she wasn't ready to leave. Not just yet. Elias blinked blearily at the steaming cup on his console. It wasn't his. He didn't own anything that produced steam, unless you counted the time he accidentally microwaved a sock with his ration pack. That incident had resulted in both an official warning and an unexpected friendship with the ship's cleaning bot. But this cup, it was clean, fragrant, and ceramic, which meant someone had gone out of their way to steal it from Officer's Mess. That narrowed the suspects to a very specific alien with glowing cheek lines and the social subtlety of a plasma grenade. He turned around, scratching the back of his neck. "You again?" Yelshera stood in the same spot she had last night, just inside the door, her arms crossed like she was guarding the secrets of the universe. Or maybe just trying to figure out how humans could function without armor or purpose. You left this outside your door, she said, gesturing to the cup like she'd just delivered a diplomatic communique from the high courts of Zarel. I don't even have a kettle, he muttered. Do you think I have tea parties in here with invisible guests? She tilted her head. I assumed humans boiled leaf water nightly. That's okay, fair. He picked up the cup, took a sip, and immediately coughed. Did you steep this with jet fuel? Her expression shifted. Slightly, very slightly. It might have been amusement. Or maybe her species just suffered from spontaneous facial muscle spasms. You add nutrient foam cubes for strength. You are weak without strength. He raised an eyebrow. You mean sugar? Cube of white, dissolves in heat, stimulates pleasure cortex. Yeah, sugar. There was a pause. She walked across the room without invitation, because invitations were apparently not a Virilan concept, and sat again on the bench beneath the viewport. She folded her arms and stared out at the stars. He watched her for a moment, then returned to his bunk, collapsing into the kind of flop that suggested he'd lost a fight with gravity. So, he said, voice muffled by the pillow, are we going to pretend this is normal, or are we just skipping to the part where I charge you rent? She didn't respond, just kept watching the stars, her posture still as a statue. I accept credits, he added. Or I guess, glowing space pebbles, whatever your people use for currency. We use respect, honor, and shared blood trials. He turned his head slowly toward her. Please never pay me. That made her smirk. Barely, but it was there. They sat in silence for a while. Her like a sentinel, him like a very confused, tired mammal. The room felt oddly balanced, as if someone had pressed pause on the war. Eventually, Elias shifted again. You know, this is the part where you're supposed to explain yourself, like in those old movies. Forgive me, human. I was lost and found your scent intoxicating. Something like that. I was not lost, she said, straightening. I am never lost. The hallway signage is poorly optimized. He grinned. So you're saying you broke into my room because humans have bad handwriting? Yes. He let out a short laugh and waved his hand toward the ceiling. Great. If we ever go to war again, we should just change all our street signs. You guys will never find us. Her eyes narrowed, but the edge of her mouth tugged again. A second smirk. That had to be some kind of record. The lights flickered above, casting momentary shadows. The ship groaned softly. Nothing serious, just the usual atmospheric recalibrations and overworked engines complaining about not having a day off. You coming back tomorrow? Elias asked without looking at her. I have not decided. He nodded. Cool. I'll save you a pillow. And maybe hide the jet fuel this time. She said nothing more. But when she stood and left, the cup was gone too. The smell of the tea lingered, strange and slightly terrifying. He looked at the door for a long time after it closed, then turned to his sock drawer, just in case she'd stashed anything else in there. You never know with aliens. Elias ducked under the dangling bundle of cooling cables in the corridor, nearly bashing his head for the third time that week. They'd been scheduled for repair 2 days ago, but in true interspecies fashion, the maintenance crew and the requisitions officer were locked in an ongoing semantic debate over what urgent meant. On Earth, apparently, it meant fix it today. On Virella, it meant evaluate for 6 moons and file a report. The cables remained. He rubbed the side of his neck as he walked toward his quarters. His shift had been long. 2 skirmish drills, a mandatory unity workshop where someone tried to teach him how to say trust in 12 alien dialects, and a 3-hour equipment audit in which the only missing item was his own patience. Still, he smiled when he saw the faint flicker of light under his door. Inside, she was already sitting in her usual spot, legs crossed, posture stiff as if waiting for a verdict. You know, he said as the door closed behind him, it's customary on Earth to say hi when you break into someone's room for the 5th time. I do not break, she replied evenly. The door accepted my entry. Yeah, well, my door also accepts jammed socks, so I wouldn't call it a great judge of character. He tossed his pack onto the bunk and flopped down beside it. So how was your day in the galaxy's most polite war machine? I interrogated a technician. He failed to explain why the pressure seals in Docking Bay 4 hiss without cause. Maybe the ship's just trying to flirt. She didn't laugh. She never laughed. But her eyes flicked toward him with something that might have been amusement or just a brief ocular recalibration. He decided to believe it was the first one. I also received a message from the High Council, she added, voice tight. Let me guess. They're thrilled you've made friends with the species that still thinks ketchup counts as a vegetable. They are monitoring my behavior. Great. If they put a listening device in here, tell them I talk in my sleep, and I'm deeply, deeply boring. Yelshera stood abruptly and began pacing, a slow, deliberate motion like she was recalculating her position in a battlefield. They question the Alliance, she said. They question me. Well, Elias said, sitting up, then they've clearly never tasted popcorn. She paused. You reference this food often. He pointed at the small stasis canister on the console. Try it. Sweet, salty, and disappointingly addictive. Like most human decisions. She eyed it with suspicion, took one piece between her fingers, and cautiously placed it on her tongue. Her face didn't change. Her hand moved again, faster, then again. Within 30 seconds, half the canister was gone. Elias leaned back, arms behind his head. See? Humanity's greatest weapon. She stopped mid-chew. This is unwise. Yup, that's our brand. For a moment, the air felt light. Even the ship's distant hum seemed quieter. But then the intercom buzzed overhead. A mechanical voice, filtered and clipped, spoke in common. All officers to command deck. Security incident in progress. Repeat, security incident in progress. Yelshera was already standing. Her body shifted into something colder, more precise. Elias groaned, reaching for his boots. Can't a guy finish corrupting an alien diplomat in peace? As they left the room together, she looked at him. You're not corrupting me. He grinned. Yet. They marched side by side down the corridor as red lights pulsed along the ceiling. Somewhere behind them, a kernel of popcorn rolled slowly off the console and landed on the floor with a soft plink. Neither looked back. The lights on the command deck had been switched to combat blue, which made everyone look vaguely undead and dramatically incompetent. Elias squinted through the haze of tension and status readouts, trying to locate a chair that didn't squeak or shock him. He failed, then failed again, then settled for standing near a potted oxygen plant that might have been fake. Yelshera stood dead center, her posture ramrod straight, flanked by two of her own kind. Lieutenant Varesh, who looked like he slept in his armor, and someone whose name Elias hadn't learned because they hissed every third syllable. Greaves was already there. Captain Lena Greaves, the kind of officer who read security logs for pleasure and filed reports in triplicate just to feel alive. She glanced at Elias like he was a smudge on her datapad. Sergeant Monroe, she said crisply, nice of you to join us. Did you have to finish braiding your hair, or were you just slow because of all that popcorn clogging your system? Elias saluted without an ounce of seriousness. Both, ma'am. Multitasking is part of my charm. She didn't smile. She never did. Not even when promoted. Rumor had it her facial muscles had been replaced with reinforced alloy. Security breach was localized to subdeck 12, she said, tapping the holomap. Someone rerouted atmospheric diagnostics. It triggered a false vacuum alert, and 3 medbots had full panic seizures. Yelshera folded her arms. You summoned the full command staff because of frightened medbots? They shot foam at each other, Greaves replied. Then one of them screamed about existential awareness and broke its own arm. Elias leaned toward her. Did you save the footage? She ignored him. Point is, someone accessed the system manually, from a Virilan console that made the room go quiet. Elias watched Yelshera's fingers tighten around her belt, just slightly. I accessed diagnostics to review docking pressure readings, she said, calm but sharp. Not to incite chaos among your robots. Greaves crossed her arms. Then explain why your presence logs overlap precisely with the breach. There was a beat of silence. Elias cleared his throat. Loudly. Maybe she accidentally toggled something. I once turned off my oxygen feed trying to heat up coffee. Not my best day. This isn't about incompetence, Greaves snapped. It's about divided loyalties. Yelshera's voice dropped a note. You question my loyalty because I occupy space near a human? You occupy more than space, Commander. I read your shifts. I read his logs. Elias sighed. Should I start sleeping in the hallway? Greaves tapped the panel again. This alliance only works if both sides operate in the open. Secrets make us weak. Yelshera stepped forward. Then I will speak openly. I return to that room because it is quiet, because I do not need to command, perform, or translate there, and because he keeps feeding me crunchy salt foam. Popcorn, Elias corrected. Greaves gave him a look that could flay titanium. Is this relationship official? Officially confusing, yes, Elias said. Unofficially, I think we're emotionally hostage trading. Yelshera blinked. That sounds correct. Greaves stared at them both, then sighed in defeat. Fine, but one more breach, and I start separating beds with force fields. Elias grinned. Kinky. Varesh choked on his own breath. Meeting adjourned. As they exited, Elias nudged Yelshera with his elbow. So, did we just go public? I do not understand your Earth customs, she said, but if this is public, does it come with snacks? I'll requisition 2 buckets of popcorn and an apology letter to the Medbot. Acceptable. They walked side by side through the glowing halls, and if the security cams tracked them, neither said a word. But later that night, in the now famous room C-27, someone had cleaned the bench beneath the viewport and placed a second pillow on the bed. The Klaxons hadn't stopped for 2 hours, but Elias had stopped flinching after the first 20 minutes. He and Yelshera were crouched behind a half-melted support beam in Auxiliary Hangar 3, waiting for the Naharvek scout droid to roll past. It did, humming to itself like a smug vacuum cleaner. Elias squinted around the edge of the beam, then turned to whisper. I'm just saying, if we survive this, I'm filing a complaint about our proximity to exploding things. Filed and noted, Yelshera murmured. Though the explosion did eliminate the vending machine you despised. I miss it already, he said. It owed me 3 packets of synth pretzels. Another hum, closer this time. The droid had circled back. Elias reached for his weapon, but Yelshera placed a hand on his wrist. Let it pass. It's scanning for radiation. We emit less than the cargo crates. Speak for yourself. I radiate charm. Then you may have doomed us both. The droid floated past again, this time trailing what looked like a small streamer of coolant from a wounded vent. Yelshera's eyes narrowed as she watched it vanish through the bulkhead doors. I could disarm it with a charged pulse, she offered. Or, Elias said, standing up and brushing dust off his pants, we could do something really reckless and sneak around the back. She considered that. Reckless, unstrategic, almost certainly flawed. Thank you, he said, and started walking. They slipped through the shadows, past downed crates, and a very confused-looking maintenance bot that kept repeating, I wasn't built for this, in 4 languages. Finally, they reached the subdeck hatch. Elias tapped in the override code and turned to her. This your idea of a date night? She blinked. You are bleeding from the ear. Romance is messy. They climbed through the access chute and emerged in the rear control node, where Greaves and 3 engineers were barricaded behind a stack of deflector cores. Elias raised a hand. Good news, Wa'ananena, he said. Your popcorn supplier lives. Greaves looked like she hadn't slept in years. The Narvek encrypted our override channels. They're draining auxiliary power from every vented section. Yelshera stepped forward. Not if we reverse the magnetic pulse through the lower manifold grid. Greaves frowned. That would burn out every conduit. It will also short their link. Yelshera glanced at Elias. Assuming he can reroute the surge without turning the ship into soup. He blinked. Wait, I'm doing that part? You insisted on walking toward danger. That's how humans prove affection, correct? He sighed. Fine, but if I die, I'm haunting your quarters, and I'll bring Jazz. With everyone braced, he dove into the maintenance terminal, fingers flying. Sparks flew. The ship groaned like it had a personal opinion about everything happening. Yelshera stood at his side, one hand on his shoulder, the other gripping a pulse rifle. Seconds ticked. Then the lights flickered. Then they all came back on. And then the Narvek droid spun out, sparks bursting from its core, and fell with a very unceremonious thunk. Greaves exhaled for the first time in a full minute. Well, she muttered, That's one way to fix it. Later, after cleanup and briefings and one more passive-aggressive nod from a repaired medbot, Elias sat on the floor of C-27. Yelshera stood at the viewport, sipping from an actual mug this time. "You saved the ship," she said. "You gave me the chance," he replied. "Your choices were reckless, illogical. Welcome to humanity." She turned. "So, you will haunt my quarters with Jazz?" He laughed. "Only if you kick me out first." She walked over, sat beside him. "Then I expect I'm cursed forever." He leaned his head against hers, and for once nothing beeped, nothing flashed, just warmth, just stillness, and one last very faint crunch of popcorn.